What's up, Crypto Knights? Derrick here with you again, and it is Friday, July 27th, 2018. That's right, we are almost in August already, and this year is just absolutely flying by. I cannot believe we're already approaching August, and of course, life in the cryptocurrency scene moves more quickly than most other spaces, and there's always some new story that's breaking and something exciting going on in this space, and that's no different today. So today we're going to talk about some big news that just broke, and this is in regards to the Winkklevoss Twins, the owners and founders of the Gemini exchange, and their proposed ETF getting rejected by the SEC. Okay, so the Gemini Winkklevoss Twins proposed ETF was originally rejected back in 2017, but the Winkklevoss Twins decided that they were going to appeal it, and they put in an appeal with some additional information that they felt could move the needle and hopefully get this ETF approved. But it turns out that's not going to be the case. The SEC did vote 3-1 against allowing this ETF to be approved and enter the market for different investors and traders to get involved with. And so we're going to talk about what that means, whether that's going to affect the other ETFs that are currently out there and going through the process of trying to gain approval, and what it means for the future of cryptocurrency in general and the markets overall as they stand right now. So as you can see, we have gone back under 8K. We are trading below $8,000 again for Bitcoin. And a lot of people have come out and said, this is directly because of the news breaking about this Bitcoin ETF being rejected. And I don't personally believe that. I think a lot of times we look for a news story or something to kind of, justify why the market's doing what it's doing. But this is actually expected, okay? I've been talking about the fact that we need a pullback, and we went from the levels of about 58.50 all the way up to 84, actually just briefly with a single wick in the 8,500 level over a pretty short period of time. So a cool down was necessary. It just so happens that there's the coincidence here where this news broke on the same day that the correction went and did what it's going to do. So I think going into the weekend here, we did bounce off the 78.50 level a couple of times today, and that seems to be a pretty strong support level after this most recent rally. So it'll be interesting going into the weekend, seeing where we are after the weekend, and as the volumes are typically lower on the weekends and most of the buying volume is bots, there's a lot of bot traffic and a lot of bot trading on the weekends, whereas Monday through Friday, of course, bots are always active in any financial market, but particularly in the cryptocurrency market. But Monday through Friday, you also have more real everyday people trading and investing and doing their thing in the markets. So let's take a look at the CNBC story that broke here, and it says Winkklevoss Twins Bitcoin ETF rejected by the SEC. So why was it rejected is the key thing that we want to talk about, because that's what I think is important as far as whether or not we're going to be able to see these other ETFs that are going through the process right now be approved or postponed or just straight up rejected, as the Winkklevoss Twins ETF was. So this is the second attempt. Again, the SEC hasn't yet to approve any cryptocurrency-based ETFs, and there's a big reason for that, a couple of reasons that they also reiterated in this particular rejection notice to the Winkklevoss Twins. So the big point here is that they're disapproving this because they say in particular that more than 3/4 of the volume in Bitcoin occurs outside of the United States, and that 95% of the volume occurs on non-US exchanges. The bid-ask spreads vary widely across exchanges, and the volume in the Bitcoin futures markets are very small. So 20% the volume of platinum and 2.5% that of silver. So the long story short of why the SEC is rejecting this particular ETF is that basically, as you probably know, the vast majority of Bitcoin trading takes place on exchanges that are outside of the US. If we're just talking about standard spot exchanges, we have Bitfinex, we have Binance, etc. If we're talking about contracts and futures, then we have BitMEX is by far the largest exchange out there for Bitcoin itself, and that of course is Seychelles Corporation. So the real big issue that the SEC is pointing out here is that they don't think that the market as it is today allows for them to really watch what's going on. Okay, so the agency indicated that its mission is designed to prevent fraudulent or manipulative acts or practices and to protect investors, and that they were concerned about fraud and manipulation of Bitcoin, particularly since this is done in a largely unregulated offshore market. Okay. They did want to point out that the disapproval does not rest on an evaluation of whether Bitcoin or blockchain technology has value as an innovation or investment. So I did think it was interesting that they pointed that out. They put that in their statement when they rejected this proposal. But the big thing here is that most of the volume, 95% of it is, it's pretty much all of the volume, takes place on non-US exchanges, which are beyond the reach of the SEC's control in a lot of ways. And also, they're just not very well regulated. There's not a lot of transparency, right? We've talked about this issue before with different exchanges and how they have wash trading. And there's a lot of spoofing on order books. There's a lot of things that go on in the cryptocurrency markets today that are completely illegal and banned in more regulated markets. And so the SEC is basically looking at this like they would any other market. And since they're doing that, there's some issues, right? So looking at this article from Bitcoinist here, of course, it was 3-1 against, and it doesn't appear like this particular ETF is going to get another chance. It is dead for the time being. But there is some hope with some of these other ETFs that are going through. But personally, I think that right now, based off of this particular decision for the Winklevoss Twins and really just what the SEC said, and why they're rejecting it, that kind of an issue is not really going to be fixed by any of these other ETFs. Okay, the CBOE ETF that everybody's really excited about and that looks more hopeful and more likely to be approved than any of the others, they added some really good things, which is they've added custodian service, they've added security and insurance. They were talking about having up to a $125 million insurance plan to start, and then if the ETF volume grows larger than that, then they will increase the insurance at a $1 to $1 rate. So everything will be insured, and they have custodianship worked out and all that. So that's really good. But the main issue here that they keep coming back to is that the majority of trading happens on unregulated markets that can be very easily manipulated. And because of that, the SEC doesn't feel comfortable allowing an ETF to be listed on one of the US-based stock exchanges, okay? So that's the big thing. And we also just saw this just a couple days before. The SEC delayed decision on 5 different Bitcoin ETFs. So when this news first broke today on the Winklevoss Twins ETF being rejected, a lot of people freaked out and were like, oh, the ETF's dead. But there's a lot of information going around, and you may not know that there's several different cryptocurrency ETFs all in the application process right now. They're all trying to get ETFs through. So one of them getting rejected doesn't necessarily mean all of them will be rejected. Also, right here in this article, it talks about the fact that there are 5 different Bitcoin ETFs that were delayed. And those are going to be looked at over the coming months. September 21st, 2018 is when these next ETFs will be looked at. But this notably does not include the proposed ETFs from Van Eck and SolidX, which are, of course, the ones connected to CBOE. And those are the ones, again, that look the most promising. But in my previous video, I did say that the chances of the Bitcoin ETF being approved on August 16th are very, very slim, right? And the reason for that is because there is a process by which there can be delays, and the delays typically happen. And I didn't break that down for you in a really thorough way, and I'd like to take a look and have you, take a look at this Twitter post, this thread here from Jake Chervinsky, who actually did break it down in a really solid and easy to understand way. And Jake is a securities lawyer. He's a government enforcement, defense, and securities litigation lawyer. So he knows a lot about the SEC and how this process works. So he says, "It kills me to tweet about SEC rulemaking procedures, but given the confusion on crypto Twitter today, it feels necessary. Too long, didn't read. The SEC can and probably will delay its decision on the Van Eck SolidX community-backed Bitcoin ETF until February 21st, 2019. Now, he actually further down in this thread fixes that date. The actual date that it will most likely be when we get a decision for this CBOE ETF is actually March 4th, 2019. And remember in my last video, I talked about how, I think this will probably happen in early 2019 instead of 2018. But he goes on to say some background. Unlike other types of funds like mutual funds, closed-end funds, etc., the federal securities laws did not originally provide for ETFs. As a result, ETFs have to obtain an individualized exemptive order from the SEC before going to market. The timing of the ETF approval process follows a standard formula. The ETF files a proposed rule change with the SEC. The SEC posts notice of the filing in the Federal Register and solicits comments. And the SEC has 45 days from posting to approve or deny the ETF. And this is the big part here. Except the SEC doesn't have to decide within 45 days. It can extend the deadline up to 3 times. 45 more days if a longer period is appropriate. 90 more days for the ETF to address grounds for disapproval, and 60 more days if, again, a longer period is appropriate. This means the real deadline for the SEC to approve or deny an ETF is 240 days after it files notice in the Federal Register, 45 plus 45 plus 90 plus 60. Yet, because of how the law works, the SEC can't just set a 240-day deadline from the jump. It has to do the extensions one at a time. Today, the SEC extended its deadline to approve or deny the Direction Futures-backed Bitcoin ETF by 60 days. The new deadline is September 21st. This is the third and final extension allowed by law, in case you were wondering. So that goes back to the article we were just looking at from CoinDesk and the 5 Bitcoin ETFs that were delayed. And this is, fitting with what he's telling you about the timeline. Okay, he also said here, CoinDesk reported, notably, none of the ETF proposals being postponed are from Van Eck and SolidX. But this isn't notable at all. The deadline to approve or deny the Direction ETF was July 23rd. As explained, the SEC waits until the deadline before issuing another extension. The SEC wasn't making a decision about all of the pending Bitcoin ETFs today. It was just handling the next step in the process for the Direction ETF. It had absolutely no reason or justification to address the Van Eck SolidX ETF. The fact it didn't do so is meaningless. So the SEC's timing on the Direction ETF is totally standard. The notice was originally posted on January 24th. First extension issued on March 1st, which is 45 days later. Second extension issued on April 23rd, another 45 days later. And the third extension issued on July 24th, 90 days later. So the standard timing for the Van Eck SolidX ETF would be, notice was originally posted on June 26th. First extension expected August 10th, 45 days later. Second extension expected September 24th, 45 days later. And third extension expected December 23rd, 90 days later. Add 60 days to December 23rd and you get a final deadline of February 21st, 2019. This could move forward or back by a few days. Let me skip that. He says down here, he says correction on the timeline. The final deadline should be March 4th, 2019, as I just told you a little bit ago. Notice was actually published on July 2nd, not June 26th. Adjusting for the weekend deadlines, which carry over to Mondays, you end up on March 4th. The amount of time lawyers spend calculating deadlines may surprise you. And he also says here, I understand if Hopium has you thinking, okay, but just because the SEC can delay doesn't mean it will. Sure, that's fine in theory, but I can't imagine the SEC will approve the first ever Bitcoin ETF without taking all the time allowed by law. Sorry, get ready to wait. And so I wanted to read that for you and just let you know this is what I said, only I didn't have all the great details here that Jake has provided. But, I told you that the chances of this happening in the first 45 days are basically non-existent because ETFs don't get approved that quickly. And this is a pretty big deal to have a Bitcoin ETF. This is a very volatile, new and revolutionary asset class. And to think it's just going to fly through the approval process for the SEC is just unrealistic. Okay, so as he says, get ready to wait. Most likely we're going to see a Bitcoin ETF next year, not this year. I don't think any of these ETFs that are going through right now are going to be approved anytime soon. Now, the Direction ETF that's being talked about here is pretty interesting. And that, again, is going to get a final decision on September 21st. And I think this one might actually have some sort of a chance of passing because this one is a futures-based ETF. And we already have the futures market, and that has already gotten the approval of the CFTC, and it's already out there running. And so that's kind of a more regulated Bitcoin market. It doesn't have custodianship needs or issues as it's all cash settled. So we may see the Bitcoin futures ETF get an approval, but I'm still not really thinking it's too likely yet. So the big takeaway here is that we need more liquidity in the market. I think what they said based off of just how little the futures markets affect the overall volume in crypto, I believe if the futures markets pick up significantly, if they're a much larger percentage of the overall market than they are now, then the SEC can say, well, we do have these futures markets and they are regulated and they do have a lot of volume. And so we can look at that and see that, there's something we can trust that is not highly manipulated and not just existing overseas on these exchanges that we can't really look at or know what's going on. The other part of that is just simply more time for the industry to grow. So we do have all these institutional investors getting in, and over the next several months, we're going to start to see them open up their own trading desks. And if you have the Goldman Sachs and all of these big players with their own trading desk, with their own spot prices and all that kind of stuff, I think then you'll probably get more willingness from the SEC to say, okay, we can see that the market is more regulated. It's not completely controlled by these overseas unregulated exchanges, and then they can probably have a little bit more trust in it. So once again, we're just a little bit too early. I know that this is something that a lot of people are kind of riding on right now, that they're hoping that this ETF is going to get approved this month, or I should say August, and that we're just going to get off to the races and be back at all-time highs in a week or so. But it's pretty unlikely. These things do take time. And that's just where we're at right now. So with that said, I do believe we are going to get an ETF. I do not believe it's going to be this year. I am hopeful that it will come in 2019. And just remember, again, we're so early to all this. If you would have even mentioned the fact that this kind of thing could be happening a year ago, people would have probably thought you were crazy. So, and if you go back 2 years ago, people would have thought you were absolutely nuts. We've been talking about Bitcoin ETF, Goldman Sachs trying to trade Bitcoin, all this stuff. It just wouldn't have been something that people think about. So, be patient. It's Still a good time in the market if you're trading. Of course, if you're a trader, you can make money in a bear market or a bull market. If you are a hodler, well, there is, of course, a lot to look forward to in the future. But, we're just not quite where we need to be right now to get an ETF approved. So with that, I am signing off. Please go ahead and subscribe if you have not subscribed to the channel yet. Leave this video a thumbs up and give me a comment. What do you think? Do you think the Bitcoin ETF from CBOE can be approved? Or do you think it's going to get delayed? What do you think about the SEC's decision? And go ahead and please share this video with your friends and click that notification bell so you can go ahead and get every new video that we make on this channel delivered to you right away, and so you don't miss anything. And with that, I'll talk to you again very, very soon. Peace.